So I'm Robert Emmett Herning. I'm head of Blue Stack Productions, the publisher of Irish Environment, an online magazine covering environmental matters on the island of Ireland. And I'm very happy today to be here in Bangor in Northern Ireland with Patrick Cregg. Patrick, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Patrick, now what's your position with Woodland Trust of Northern Ireland?
I'm in the very privileged position that I am the director of the Woodland Trust in Northern Ireland. And indeed, I always thank my blessings that I was the first employee for the Trust. When the Trust decided that it would come across the Irish Sea from Great Britain, they appointed me to actually set up and head up operations here in the province.
And how long ago was that?
That was way back in the last century, so that was 1996.
You look so young for being in the past century. Now, just for the audience, would you just briefly tell them what the Woodland Trust is and what it does?
Yeah, put very, very simply, we are the voice of trees and woodland, the voice of trees and native woodland. So our role is to actually encourage people to protect what we have, to restore what has been damaged, and to increase woodland cover, because we have the unenviable record here in Northern Ireland as being bottom of the league in terms of woodland cover. So if we look at the European League, Northern Ireland sitting at about 8% woodland cover. Our friends in the Republic of Ireland will be sitting around 12. Great Britain will be about 12. But when we look at the wider European cover, it can be anything up to 44%. So nearly half the land area covered in trees. And as an organisation, we want to redress the balance. We've set a target, as has our government at Stormont, of doubling woodland cover to 12% by the year 2050.
Now, the Woodland Trust UK-wide owns a number of sites, something like 1,000 sites?
Over 1,000 sites. We're just soon will be hitting about 25,000 hectares of land that we own. In Northern Ireland, we own just over 50 sites, probably something in the region of about 800 acres. But we are growing, we're buying as and when the opportunities present, where it makes good sense in terms of conservation, we are actually buying. So we're growing our estate, and we would hope that by the year 2025 our estate will have grown by 20%. So that is a significant amount of activity over the next 9 years to ensure that we reach that target, so that we will add something in the region of about another 5,000 hectares to our land ownership.
And do you manage only land that you own, or do you also manage other land?
We have some land which will come to us on short-term lease, and we will manage that on behalf of the owners, but we will only do that if there is a purpose, if there is an environmental gain from it. So currently we're exploring a piece of land which is ancient woodland, but ancient woodland which was degraded because it's been planted with non-native conifers. The intention would be that we would take that into our ownership on a lease for 25 years, restore it back to its former glory as ancient woodland, and then return it to its current owners.
Let's start with Northern Ireland. What type of woodland cover is it in terms of new plantings and what kind of species?
So as I said, 8% of Northern Ireland is covered in woodland. The vast majority of that, about 80% of that, is non-native woodland. So it'll be the conifer plantations that are grown for commercial gain, and we have no problem with that, because we see that as an important part of our economy. So in fact, the native woodland element is quite a small area of land. So 20% of the woodland in Northern Ireland is native woodland. If we look at ancient woodland, and ancient woodland is woodland that we can trace back to pre-1600, then Northern Ireland has got less than 1% of its woodland as ancient woodland, and it's roughly about 10,000 hectares would be what we would classify as either ancient, dated back to pre-1600, or long established, which is dated back to the first edition ordnance surveys, which would have been carried out in the 1830s. So we've got very little ancient woodland. Of the ancient woodland that we have, the 10,000 hectares, about a third of that has been degraded because it's been planted with conifers.
Uh-huh.
So about 3,000 hectares has been planted with conifers. But it's not a lost cause.
Uh-huh.
There's still an opportunity to restore some of that woodland, and that's what our focus is on at the moment, bringing those which are ancient but have been degraded back to what their original glory was.
Now this is the Heritage Lottery Fund project, right? And that
Yes.
was 1.9 million
Yeah.
pounds from 2013 to 2017. Now, and Northern Ireland is one of the 10 priority areas within that project.
Yeah.
And your how many acres or hectares are you now restoring under that project of ancient? This is just applied to ancient woodland, correct?
Yeah. So this will be ancient plus long established. So anything that was in existence from 1830 and back and before.
Okay.
So in fact, what we're hoping to do is we reckon that there are 3,000 hectares which are degraded.
Mm-hmm.
Of that, 1,000 hectares is in private ownership, and we're focusing on that land that is in private ownership. Our intention would be that by the end of the project that we would have restored a quarter of that, about 250, 260 hectares would be back. But because that project is going so well, there is an enthusiasm for it. Because people who have ancient woodland and who've discovered they have an ancient woodland, they kind of regard it as being like a prize. They weren't aware of its significance. They weren't aware that it is a finite resource. You just can't create ancient woodland, you know. And so people are very enthusiastic about restoring it. So I have no doubt that the 250, 260 hectares that we set as a target that we will exceed. And our wish would be that all of the woodland that has been degraded would be restored through this project. Now that'll take a while, but it's worth doing.
Now the 250 acres is all private.
Yeah.
And is that a number of different landowners or several?
That'll be several landowners. Some of them will be big estates. Some of them will be small farms that have never discovered or didn't know they had ancient woodland. And it's interesting because when the trust set up in Northern Ireland in 1996, and when we started talking about ancient woodland, there was a lot of scepticism about whether ancient woodland existed in Ireland. So one of the first things we did as an organisation was to invest £1 million with the help of the Environment Agency and the Heritage Lottery Fund to actually map all of the ancient and long established woodlands in the province. And we were very, very lucky because in fact if we look at the history of Ireland and we look at going back to the pre-plantation days, the Queen Elizabeth I at the time sent a mapper to Ireland to map the countryside, and that showed us what woodlands were there. When she died, and I think it was James I or James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, took over, he continued that work. So we were in a very fortunate position, unlike other parts of the UK and indeed Europe, in that we had these old maps that were still in existence, that had been created by chaps like Bodley and Bartlett, and we were able to track and see which woods were there at the turn of the 1600s. When we studied those maps, we plotted every single wood that we could find on those maps, and then we jumped forward to the 1830s to look at the Ordnance Survey maps, and we matched what woods were still there in the 1830s that we had discovered in the late 1500s, early 1600s. We then jumped forward again to the 1960s and looked at the Ordnance Survey maps to see exactly which woods that were there in the 1830s still existed in the 60s, in the 1960s. And obviously lots of them had disappeared. Armed with that, we sent ecologists and anybody that we could out to actually physically examine the sites.
Now, Patrick, was there a bigger loss between the original survey from Elizabeth till the 1830 or between 1830 and 1960?
I think the biggest loss was from the 1960s until we did the site surveys. and I think it was something in the region of about something like 12% of the ancient woodlands that had been there in 1960s had been lost by the time we actually got out to do the actual footwork. And we examined the reasons for that, and it was a combination of agriculture and agricultural practices. Also things like golf courses featured quite highly, and some housing developments and stuff like that. We as an organisation has managed to buy some of these old woods as well. One of the first woods we bought was a wood called Prehen in the city of Derry. Prehen, when we looked at the old maps, would have extended from Derry down along the River Foyle right down to Strabane. But most of it has been eroded and has disappeared. But there is a small wood, about 18 acres, still remaining, and we managed to actually buy that with the help, once again, of our friends at the Heritage Lottery Fund and the Environment Agency. And this is the important thing, that, you know, when people buy their lottery ticket, they don't probably know the kind of good work that comes. You know, it's not. We'd all love to win the lottery, but it's not about winning the lottery. It's about actually supporting causes, not just the Woodland Trust, but many of the other, whether it's natural environment, built environment, some of the cultural projects that they actually fund. And that makes life a lot easier for us, because we can take it into our ownership. And where we differ from some organisations is that all of our sites afford free public access. So you don't need to be a member of the Woodland Trust to actually visit one of our sites. They are open, they are welcoming, and in fact we encourage people to be involved. So maybe volunteering, or they may wish to hold events in our woods. And it's about engaging with communities, creating hopefully the tree champions of the future.
In your project under the Heritage Fund, you're restoring these ancient woodlands. What does that entail? You are cutting out the conifer plantations that have creeped into that? And do you do anything with the ancient trees themselves to restore them?
What we will normally do is start off by surveying the site, looking at what remnants of the ancient woodlands still remain, with the intention that we would gradually remove the conifers. And then if you've got a remnant oak, it will seed itself and then start to propagate through the wood. What we try to avoid is clear felling, because if you clear fell a site, then you'll get brambles and you get ferns and stuff coming over onto the site, and that will actually hinder the process of the regeneration of the wood. So it's really assisting the woodland to regenerate itself by clearing pockets. And that's why I say if we look at a project, we might be looking at a management plan that extends for the next 25 years, so that we're gradually restoring it and that nature is taking back what we took from it.
Now, it's interesting that you use the phrase special places, and they certainly are. And one of the obvious things that are special about ancient woodlands, of course, is the aesthetic. I mean, the conifer plantations are just kind of boring, frankly, and there's all this incredible variety. But what else makes the ancient woodlands special besides the aesthetic issue?
I think it's the ground flora, you know, that it supports, and the changing seasons, which really, you know, we've been looking at the kind of, and I'm not an expert on this, but we've been looking at kind of things like the fungi, which would be peculiar to ancient woodland, the ground flora, you know, the species, the variety of species of ground flora that would be peculiar to an ancient woodland. And I suppose, you know, if we think of bluebells, you know, soon we will be enjoying, you know, bluebell woods. And ancient woodlands in particular are fantastic for bluebells. Things like wild garlic, things like wood sorrel, and as I said, all the various different types of fungi that are associated with ancient woodlands. So they are. And then you get things like land banks, you know, which were kind of constructed around the woodland, you know, whether to keep cattle in or keep cattle out. It differed from area to area.
These special places, not only the ancient but also the long established, what's the threat to them from climate change impacts?
Well, what we suspect is that as the temperatures begin to rise, and they are rising, we can't deny that in fact the species that rely on these sites will be gradually pushed further and further north. For instance, beech is not native to Ireland. It's not native to Northern Ireland, and I don't think it's native to the Republic of Ireland. But as we get drier climates, probably beech might be a tree of the future. So in fact we are conscious that we need to diversify in terms of the number of trees we plant, the types of trees we plant. We still stick rigidly to trying to plant native trees, but more importantly planting native trees of local provenance, because I think the failure in the past is that we took an oak to be an oak to be an oak to be native to Ireland. Whilst the oak may be native to Ireland, perhaps the oaks that we were planting might have been coming from the Mediterranean, and were not suitable for this climate. So we need to be aware that we need to plan for the future and make sure that our woods are resilient. We need to have a plan B. We need to be planning for the future. What we did in the past might not suffice for the future. So as an organisation, we will constantly be analysing and organising and checking. And we've got a citizen science project on at the moment, which actually invites members of the public to go online and record what's happening in their area at a particular time of the year. So we may be asking people to tell us when they had the first sighting of bluebell, budburst, hawthorn coming into flower, autumn colour, and that's beginning to build up a picture about are things happening earlier. And yes, they are happening earlier. And if we take something like budburst, so if trees are coming into leaf earlier, then what impact might that have on the ground flora, the bluebells, and the bluebells would normally be in flower before the leaves come on the trees. So it's looking at those relationships and seeing exactly what do we need to do to ensure that we do continue to enjoy, the riots of colour that is bluebell.
Now, Patrick, does the government have a tree planting initiative at all, or is it strictly on your hands?
No, in fact, the government in the mid-2000, 2006, I think it was, the government committed to doubling woodland cover in Northern Ireland. To double woodland cover, we need to be planting something in the region of about 1,750 hectares per annum. The government assures us that they will achieve the doubling of woodland cover. Unfortunately, the record to date would not inspire the same confidence in me that they will do that. We are roughly sitting at around 300 hectares being created every year in Northern Ireland.
Since which year, Patrick?
Since 2000.
Since 2000?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we need to be doing 5 times that. We really need to be getting up 15, 16, 1700 hectares if we are realistic about doubling woodland cover. And that's where our role comes in as well, because we, as well as owning woodlands, helping others to create woodland and to manage woodlands and restore woodlands, we also are a lobbying organisation. So we will have a presence at Stormont, where we are speaking to our elected members, where we are presenting to their committees, where we are holding the minister to account to ensure that what he says he's going, or she say they will do, that they are actually doing it. Now, time will tell how successful we are with that. But we were very, very lucky in that in 2010 we convinced government at Stormont that we needed new legislation. We needed legislation around woodlands that reflected the wider importance of woodland. Prior to 2010, the legislation purely concentrated on the need for commercial woodlands. But what we were keen to expand that use of woodlands beyond the commerce beyond the environmental benefits, but also the health benefits, the education benefits, and the economic benefits of woodlands. And in 2010, we've got from the Assembly what we would regard as being probably the gold standard of legislation for forestry in these islands. And in fact, I know that some of our colleagues elsewhere in Great Britain, particularly places like Wales, are looking at what was achieved here to see if it can be replicated in Wales.
Now, I'm going to end by not letting you rest on your laurels, okay? You've done all this, now what's next for you?
Our next is, we are, at the moment, we are in the middle of a £1 million project. And this £1 million project is to create a commemorative site to remember all of the lives of those from the island of Ireland, north and south, who lost their lives in the First World War. And to do this, we have acquired a farm just outside Derry. It's just over 50 acres, and the project has just started, and we're just about to expand that. So we're hoping the project will be 100 acres in total, and that will be to commemorate the efforts of all the Irish, and we reckon there was something between 40 and 50,000 Irish lives lost in the First World War, and that we will plant between 40 and 50,000 trees.
40 or 50,000?
And at the centre of this new woodland will be an information hub, and it will tell the various stories of the various Irish regiments who fought and unfortunately made the ultimate sacrifice during the First World War. There will also be sculptures. There will be a poet in residence who we've commissioned who will write poems around each of the various regiments, and these will be scattered throughout the woodland on pieces of sculpture. So that's a £1 million project. It will be the biggest commemorative project on the island of Ireland to remember First World War. It runs down to the River Faughan, and I always liken the River Faughan to a Hollywood actor or actress. It's got more gongs than a Hollywood actress. It is an area of special scientific interest. It's also got the European designation of Special Area of Conservation, and that is based around primarily its salmon population in the river. It's got otters, it's got everything, it's got red squirrels. So it's just, in terms of conservation, it's absolutely a cracking site. And we will hope that it will become a destination point, because we own other land in the area. By the time we finish this project, we'll probably own about just under 200 acres of woodland. The Environment Agency own an equal amount just abutting our site. So you'll have about 400 acres of woodland. You'll have something like 10 miles of walkways, some of them riverside walks, some of them through woodlands, some of them through wildflower meadows. And our dream is that people will come to County Fermanagh if they want to see lakes. If they want to see giant stones, they'll go to the Giant's Causeway. But we want to put Derry and we want to put the Faughan Valley on the map of the must-visit place if you enjoy woodlands.
Thanks for talking with us today.
You're very, very welcome, and welcome to Bangor.
Thanks.